soldier lost everything for 13 years, until a loyal K9 carried something in his mouth that changed his life forever. They said heroes never get left behind. But no one came for Elias Granger. Once a soldier who stood tall in enemy fire, now reduced to a number behind iron bars. 13 winters passed. Not a single knock on his cell door. Birthdays forgotten. Family silent. Medals? Gone. Reputation? Ruined. All because of a single moment he couldn't erase. A betrayal that buried him alive. The world believed he was guilty. The courts had slammed the gavel. And so, the war hero became a ghost in a place where no one cared who you were, only what you were accused of. Elias never cried. He never shouted. He simply stopped hoping. But hope doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it walks in on 4 legs, with eyes full of secrets, and something clenched in its mouth that would change everything. Before prison walls became his home, Elias Granger's name was synonymous with courage. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the kind of man who could lead a charge into enemy territory and bring his men back alive, no questions asked. His reputation spread far beyond his battalion. He wasn't just known for his bravery. He was known for his heart. And beside him, through every harrowing battle, was his K9 partner, Duke. They weren't a team. They were family. Where Elias went, Duke followed without hesitation, without fear. They'd been through it all, from the treacherous deserts to dense jungles, from enemy lines to hostile terrains. In every dangerous situation, they could rely on each other to stay one step ahead. Duke wasn't just a dog to Elias. He was a comrade, a brother in arms. Together, they had saved countless lives. Whether it was sniffing out explosives hidden in the ground or searching for survivors trapped beneath rubble, Duke's instincts matched Elias's skill. It was a partnership built on trust, and their bond was unbreakable. In fact, it was Duke who had saved Elias's life more than once. During a deadly firefight, Duke had intercepted a grenade that was thrown their way, taking the full impact of the explosion. Elias watched as his best friend, his partner, was dragged back to safety, covered in wounds, but still alive. When asked why he risked everything for a dog, Elias had no hesitation in answering. "He's my brother, and I'll always watch his back, because he would do the same for me." The military recognized Elias's heroism, and Duke received medals of honor. Both were awarded for their bravery, but for Elias it wasn't about the medals. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered most. The man who once led charges into war, the soldier the nation revered, never needed recognition. The only reward he wanted was to make sure that those he loved, especially Duke, made it back home safe. But, as the war was winding down, things began to change. Trust, once solid as steel, began to fracture. And just when Elias thought that the worst was behind him, the rug was pulled out from under him in the most devastating way possible. No one ever told Elias that sometimes, your greatest enemies aren't the ones who shoot at you from the other side. Sometimes, the worst betrayals come from those you once called brothers. It was a mission like any other, one that Elias had led countless times before. His men trusted him. Duke trusted him. They went in, did what they had to do, and got out. But this time, things went wrong. This time, it wasn't an enemy bullet that almost took Elias down. It was the betrayal of his own. Someone had turned against them. In the chaos of the operation, a friendly fire incident occurred. Someone had miscommunicated. The explosion that rocked their unit wasn't caused by the enemy. It was caused by one of their own. The fallout was catastrophic. Lives were lost. Trust was shattered. And just like that, the man who had once been the hero was suddenly a scapegoat. The military that once celebrated his bravery now accused him of being responsible for the deaths of his own men. The blame was placed squarely on Elias's shoulders, despite his pleas of innocence. But the damage was done. The world turned on him. There were no more medals, no more parades, no more speeches. There were only accusations, doubts, and a sinking feeling of disbelief. Elias had given everything, his loyalty, his strength, his faith in the people he served with, and it was all ripped away in an instant. But the hardest blow wasn't the loss of his career or his reputation. The hardest blow was knowing that the men he had led, the men he had trusted with his life, now turned their backs on him. In a cruel twist of fate, the very same people he had risked everything for were now the ones who condemned him. And in the end, it wasn't just his honor that was lost. It was his entire world. 13 years. For Elias, it wasn't just a number. It was a prison of endless, stagnant days, each one indistinguishable from the last. He wasn't just in a cell. He was trapped in a loop of regret, isolation, and the haunting echoes of a life that once mattered. Time for him had no meaning. The world outside moved on. The seasons changed. People lived and died. But inside those cold, iron bars, it was as if time had ceased to exist. His days blurred into nights, and his nights bled into days. There was no distinction, no escape. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of everything, the absence of purpose, the absence of connection, the absence of hope. The man who had once stood at the front of battle, who had led men with unshakable strength and conviction, now sat in the shadows, forgotten by everyone. His name erased from history, his story silenced. The only sounds in his life were the distant clank of keys, the faint rustle of paper under his cell door, and the beat of his own heart, reminding him that he was still alive, even though everything around him had died. In those long, unrelenting years, Elias tried to make sense of what had happened. He replayed the day of his downfall over and over, each time hoping for a different ending. But there was no redemption in his thoughts, no answers, just the gnawing emptiness that refused to let him go. And as time passed, the man who had once been a symbol of hope for others became nothing more than a ghost in the prison system, a shadow of the hero he once was. It had been years since Elias had felt anything close to hope, let alone the sensation of someone, or something, truly understanding him. His life had become a silent prison of regret and loneliness, the pain of betrayal still raw in his heart. Then came Axel. At first, he was introduced like any other therapy dog, a companion meant to ease the minds of prisoners, to bring comfort where there was none. But Axel was different. He wasn't just a dog. He was a presence, something more than what his title suggested. From the moment Elias laid eyes on him, it was as though the world around him had shifted. Axel wasn't just sniffing out scents or wagging his tail for attention. No, there was something deep in his gaze, a knowing understanding that sent a shiver through Elias's spine. Elias had seen many dogs in his life, but this was different. Axel's eyes held stories, secrets, as though the dog already knew the pain Elias had endured, as though he could feel the scars on Elias's soul, hidden far beneath the surface. For days, Axel simply sat near his cell, watching Elias, not demanding anything, but giving everything. There were no loud barks or desperate pleas for attention. It was a quiet presence, a silent connection. In his stillness, Axel seemed to say, "I understand. You're not alone." Elias had long ago given up on the idea of someone or something understanding him. But Axel's calm, unwavering presence began to crack open the walls Elias had built around his heart. With each passing day, it was as if the dog was slowly teaching him to trust again, to believe in something good. It was subtle at first, these small shifts. A brief moment where Elias didn't feel like a complete stranger to the world. A soft nudge from Axel's nose, a wag of his tail. These little acts of affection began to stir something inside Elias. Maybe it wasn't too late to find some semblance of peace. Maybe there was still a chance to rebuild. But Axel was more than just a companion. He was a bridge to the past, a reminder of the bond Elias had once shared with Duke, a bond of loyalty and trust that he had lost. Axel didn't try to replace Duke. He simply made Elias remember the strength of that connection, and perhaps the possibility of regaining it. It was a normal day, as normal as any could be inside those walls. Axel had grown into a quiet companion, and Elias had grown used to the comfort of his presence. But nothing could prepare him for what happened next. Axel walked into Elias's cell as usual. His eyes were calm, steady, and his tail wagged slightly as he approached. But today, there was something different about his demeanor. His body seemed to exude a sense of purpose, as if he was carrying something far more significant than just a dog's daily duties. And then Axel did something that would change everything. He gently placed something in front of Elias, something that shouldn't have been there, something that hadn't been seen in over a decade. It was a worn, tattered military medal, the kind Elias had received for his bravery all those years ago. The same one that had been ripped from his chest when the accusations were made. The one that had been buried under layers of regret and betrayal. The one he thought he had lost forever. How could it be here? How had Axel found it? For a moment Elias just stared, the shock freezing him in place. His hands trembled as he reached down to take the medal, his eyes locked onto Axel's. There was something in the dog's gaze, something almost knowing, as if Axel had traveled back in time himself to bring this piece of Elias's past back to him. A rush of memories flooded Elias's mind. The proud moments of leading his men, the camaraderie, the victories, the love he had felt for Duke, the unbreakable bond they shared, the loyalty that had defined his entire career. The medal in his hand was more than just an object. It was a symbol of all he had once stood for, all he had lost, and all that had been taken from him. Axel's eyes softened as if to say, "This is yours. You never truly lost it. And you haven't lost yourself either." In that moment, Elias felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. The shame, the anger, the sadness that had consumed him for so long started to loosen its grip. The medal, an object thought to be lost forever, was a message. It wasn't just an artifact of the past. It was a reminder that there was still a chance to rebuild, to reclaim the honor that had been unjustly stripped from him. Elias's hands clutched the medal tightly as he stared at Axel, a new resolve beginning to form inside him. This was no coincidence. This dog, this incredible, loyal creature, had somehow brought him back to himself. And with that, the first spark of hope flickered inside his chest. It wasn't over. Axel hadn't just brought a piece of metal back to Elias. He had brought back his belief in redemption, his will to fight once again. And the journey to reclaim his honor was just beginning. Elias had never seen Axel like this before. The dog, usually calm and composed, had become utterly fixated on one thing. Day after day, he would circle around Elias's cell, sniffing the ground, pawing at the dirt as though something was buried just beneath the surface. His movements were persistent, determined, a silent plea for Elias to understand. At first, Elias thought it was just a fleeting moment of curiosity. After all, Axel was a dog, and dogs had their odd moments. But the more Elias watched, the clearer it became. Axel wasn't playing. He wasn't just being his usual self. He was onto something. And then, one afternoon, it happened. Axel stopped in front of a small corner of the prison yard, his paws furiously digging into the earth. His eyes were focused, intent on uncovering something, as if the ground itself was hiding the key to unlocking Elias's past. Elias stood there, frozen in awe. He had never seen a dog so determined, so utterly focused on unearthing the truth. It was as if Axel knew that something, hidden beneath years of dirt and time, was waiting to be found. Something that could change everything for Elias. Elias hesitated, but his curiosity got the best of him. He knelt down beside Axel, pulling the dirt aside with his hands. There, buried in the earth, was an old document. Yellowed with age, the edges torn and frayed. His heart raced as he pulled it free from the soil, careful not to damage the fragile piece of paper. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the document, Elias's breath caught in his throat. It was a military report, one he hadn't seen in years. The same one that had been buried, along with his reputation, when the accusations against him had surfaced. The report was crucial, the very evidence that could prove his innocence. His mind raced as he scanned the document. This was it. The truth he had been fighting for, the truth he had believed was lost forever, was now right in front of him. The very report that had been concealed for years, the one that could clear his name and bring justice to his story, had been buried deep in the prison yard, hidden, yet never forgotten. Axel had done it. Axel, the dog with knowing eyes, had uncovered the final piece of the puzzle that Elias had been desperately trying to solve. And it wasn't just by chance. It was Axel's unwavering loyalty, his silent dedication to his mission, that had led them here. The bond between Elias and Axel had always been one of companionship, but now it was clear. Axel was more than just a dog. He was the key to Elias's redemption. Together, they had followed the trail of truth, and now the path forward was laid before them. The discovery of the military report was just the beginning. As Elias carefully examined the papers, he noticed something strange, something more than what he had initially seen. The report wasn't just a simple account of the events that had taken place during his time in service. It held a deeper layer. Hidden codes, encrypted notes scribbled in the margins. They were messages from the past, things Elias hadn't noticed before, things he couldn't have understood until now. His heart raced as he pieced them together. The codes weren't random, they were deliberate messages left by someone who had worked with him back then. Someone who had seen what really happened. Someone who knew the truth but had been forced into silence. With Axel by his side, Elias dug deeper. Night after night, he stayed up in his cell, poring over every document, every scrap of evidence he could find. Each clue was like a voice from the past, calling out from the shadows, begging to be heard. And the more Elias uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The truth had been buried not just in the prison yard, but in the very system that had betrayed him. The silence wasn't an accident. It had been crafted, hidden deliberately to protect the real culprits. People who had played a part in his downfall, people who had framed him for something he hadn't done. Elias could feel the weight of the truth settling on his shoulders. It was a burden he wasn't sure he was ready to carry, but it was one he couldn't turn away from. The past was speaking now, and there was no going back. Axel, ever vigilant, sat by Elias's side, watching him work. It was as if the dog understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Every paw step, every subtle movement, seemed to convey the message. This is your truth, your redemption. Now it's time to make it right. The more Elias followed the trail, the more the pieces began to fit. A trail of deceit, a trail of betrayal, leading right back to those who had wronged him. The clues had been there all along, buried, yes, but never fully gone. Each one was like a whisper in the wind, guiding Elias toward the final reckoning. And in the silence of his prison cell, the truth began to speak. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing the lies that had kept him captive for so long. It was about taking back his honor, about showing the world the man he had once been, and proving to himself that he was still worthy of standing tall. The day of reckoning had arrived. After years of silence, of darkness, of fighting battles no one knew about, Elias stood on the edge of something he had once thought was impossible. Freedom. It wasn't just the freedom of a man being released from prison. It was the freedom that comes with knowing the truth has been heard, with the vindication of his name. 13 long years in the shadows, suffocated by the weight of false accusations, had left him broken in ways he couldn't even fully comprehend. But in the end, it was not the years that defined him. It was the fight to reclaim what was his, a fight that never truly stopped, a fight that Axel had shared with him every step of the way. When Elias first learned that the documents were real, that they held the key to proving his innocence, a spark of hope had flickered within him. But now that hope had grown into something undeniable. The truth, once buried deep in the shadows, was now out in the open. Those who had wronged him had been exposed, and the betrayal that had cost him everything was being brought to light. The trial was swift. The evidence, once hidden and silent, now spoke for itself. The documents, the hidden messages, the proof of corruption. It all came together like a flood breaking through a dam, washing away the lies that had surrounded his name for so long. The moment the verdict was read, Elias stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. The years of isolation, of grief, of betrayal, they all came rushing back. But now they were met with something stronger, justice. He wasn't just being freed from prison. He was being freed from the shackles of a past that had nearly destroyed him. And as the weight of those years lifted, he turned to Axel, the one constant in his life, the one who had never stopped believing in him. The bond between them had transcended anything Elias had ever known. Axel was more than just a companion. He was a lifeline, a reminder of everything Elias still had to fight for. The world may have turned its back on him, but Axel had never wavered. Through every dark moment, through every hopeless night, Axel had been there. Digging for the truth, standing by his side when no one else would. As Elias stepped out of the prison gates, his first breath of freedom tasted like both victory and loss. The world had moved on without him, but he wasn't too far gone. It was never too late to rebuild. His story wasn't finished, far from it. This was just the beginning of something new. 13 years too late? Yes, but not too far gone. He had been given a second chance, not just by the justice system, but by Axel, who had never stopped believing in him. Elias was a soldier once more, but this time he would fight on his own terms. The journey had been long, but it had led him to a place where he could finally say, "I am free." And as the two of them walked into the unknown together, Elias knew one thing for certain. No one could take his honor from him now. Elias didn't waste any time after his release. The world outside was different, and though his body was free, his mind carried the weight of everything he had suffered. The years of betrayal, the loss, the isolation. But Elias had made a choice long before the verdict was read aloud. He wasn't going to let this new chapter of his life be defined by the pain of his past. Instead, he would transform that pain into something that could serve a greater purpose. With Axel by his side, Elias found his way into a role he hadn't imagined possible. The military community, recognizing his unshakable courage and dedication, welcomed him back, but not as the soldier who had been wrongfully imprisoned. They offered him a new mission, one that didn't just involve fighting on the front lines, but fighting for others who had been forgotten. Elias's story became a beacon of hope for veterans and those who had fallen through the cracks. He became a mentor, guiding others who had faced betrayal and hardship. He worked tirelessly with military support organizations, using his own painful experience to help advocate for those still struggling. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about turning his story into a platform for change, for awareness, for those whose voices had been silenced just as his had been. But Elias's journey wasn't just about helping others. It was about reclaiming his own sense of purpose. The very pain that had once held him prisoner had now become the foundation of something much larger. A movement to protect, support, and honor those who had given so much, only to be forgotten or betrayed. And in this new chapter of his life, Axel stood by him as more than just a companion. He became a symbol of loyalty and protection. Together, they traveled from one military base to another, visiting wounded veterans, speaking to those who needed to hear a story of redemption and hope. It was Elias's mission to remind them, it's never too late to rebuild. Through his work, Elias also began speaking out about the injustices that had almost destroyed him. He became a voice for those who had been wrongly accused, those who had lost everything to a system that had failed them. But now he was giving them something they hadn't had before. A chance. A chance to stand tall again, to fight for themselves, to reclaim what had been taken from them. The man who had once been a soldier fighting on foreign soil was now a protector in his own right, protecting the voices that had been silenced and helping others to rise above their struggles. Elias had finally found his mission again, not as a soldier of war, but as a soldier of hope. The past had made him who he was, but it was the future that he was now shaping, with purpose, passion, and a heart full of redemption. And in his heart, he knew that his work was just beginning. As Elias walked out of the courtroom a free man, the world seemed to stand still for a moment. The years of suffering, of being cast aside, faded into the background as the reality of his freedom sank in. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer the man whose name had been tarnished. But as Elias took those first steps into the light, there was one figure who had been there through it all, one who had never once wavered in his faith, even when the world did. Axel. From the very beginning, when everyone else had doubted Elias, Axel had believed. And it was that loyalty, that undying faith, that had carried Elias through the darkest moments of his life. Axel wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of everything Elias had lost, everything he had fought to regain. When others had turned their backs on him, Axel had been the one constant. When the lies piled up, Axel had been the one to dig, literally and figuratively, until the truth was uncovered. And it was this loyalty that had changed everything. The final march wasn't just a physical journey. It was a symbolic one. Elias wasn't walking alone anymore. He was walking with a dog who had carried him through the worst of times. A dog who had believed in him when no one else did, and who had brought him back to a place of redemption. Axel's paws had marked the path, but Elias's strength and resilience had kept him moving forward. Every step they took together was a tribute to the unspoken bond between them, a bond that had defied all odds and had shown the world what true loyalty really meant. As they walked side by side, Elias knew that Axel's mission wasn't just to bring him back to freedom. It was to show the world that loyalty has the power to change lives. Axel had been Elias's rock, and now Elias was going to make sure that the world understood just how far loyalty can take you, even when everything else falls apart. The journey had been long. The battle had been brutal. But in the end, loyalty had won. It was Axel's belief in Elias that had never faltered, and that was what had truly set them both free. Elias and Axel didn't just walk out of that courtroom as two individuals. They walked out together as brothers, bound not by blood, but by something even stronger, a love that had stood the test of time, betrayal, and isolation. The world may not have understood the depth of their bond, but it didn't matter anymore. They had each other, and that was enough, because in a world that often forgets, Axel had never forgotten. And that made all the difference. As the journey of Elias and Axel comes to a close, it's important to remember the profound lesson their story teaches us. This isn't just a tale about a man and his dog. It's about unwavering loyalty, second chances, and the power of believing in one another, even when the world has turned its back. Elias's path to redemption wasn't easy. It was paved with years of suffering and betrayal. Yet, through it all, one dog never gave up on him. And in that, we find the true meaning of what it means to stand by someone, no matter the odds. Axel's loyalty wasn't just a comfort. It was a lifeline. It was the belief in Elias when nobody else would, and it was that belief that changed everything. So, as we leave this story behind, let's carry with us the reminder that loyalty has the power to heal, to restore, and to bring light into even the darkest of times. Let's remember that sometimes, all it takes is one person or one creature to believe in us when we've lost hope, and in return we can find the strength to change the world. What would you do if someone you loved believed in you when no one else did? It's a question we all can reflect on, and perhaps it's a reminder that we too have the ability to be that loyal presence in someone's life, just like Axel was to Elias. Thank you for watching, and we hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. If you've ever felt the power of loyalty, or have your own story of redemption, we'd love to hear it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that show us what it means to be truly loyal.